thanks very much for coming out in your lunch hour. I know that that takes a bit of an effort even to get one. So I'm going to give quite a personal walkthrough of my life working with art and technology, authoritative history. And I'll just briefly start by introducing myself and the Data as Culture programme to give you a bit of context. So I'm a contemporary art curator, and I specialise particularly in the increasingly irrelevant term of media art, which is, you know, art or artists working with technology, particularly emergent technologies, digital and electronic. I say increasingly irrelevant because I think that everybody is doing that now in one way or another, but it's still spoken of as a slightly different term. And Data as Culture is now in its third year, and it's our contemporary art programme here at the Open Data Institute. It's unusually led by an artist, Julie Freeman, who's here eating her sausage sandwich. And of course, Gavin Starks, our CEO, is also highly creative direction. And I've been here since last June, when I was hugely privileged to be invited by Julie and Gavin as an associate curator in residence to work with the team. So the bulk of my practice 20 years has actually been at the Science Museum in London, where I was the head of arts programme. And I established and led really over a period of about 17 years. And I commissioned artists working in all different sorts of media, works traditional sculpture, paint, lots and lots of media art and technology art, rubbish. We worked with Imagine. But my entry point there really was through working with technology, and the Science Museum built the Welcome Wing, which you can see here with the with the copyright. Oh no, there's a peculiar. I've actually pasted a password for something I'm doing on that inadvertently. So I've no idea how that happened, multitasking. But this is what the Welcome Wing looked like in 2000, when the new building had just been built. And at the time it was built as a contemporary theatre of contemporary science that had heralded a new era of science communication for the Science Museum that was very, very discursive and brought in a lot of different subjective views, as well as the authoritative or neutral voice of the Science Museum and experts. Art was a really and this gallery here was called Who Am I? And that's still there. That's about biomedical science. This gallery at the top was called Digitopolis, and that's there. And Digitopolis was a project that looked at digital technology through some of the commissions, the art commissions that we did for that project, and give you a bit of how I ended up here. So I did a fine art course, and I actually studied as a painter originally. And it was very, very traditional. So Frank Albach taught David Bromberg, who taught me, and I didn't quite reach their heights. Smack in the middle of the 1990s recession, I really found myself asking a lot of questions about the purpose of art in culture and society. And of course, the really key question there for me at that time, to continue as a practicing artist or not, which I actually quite quickly concluded I didn't want to. But one of the things that informed that was the art world at the time was very, very productive, very energetic. The young British artists in their 50s were all over the place. It was a very exciting time. And there was also an awful felt to be overly self-referential purpose and waiting for my life. I might see it differently if I were to go back in time and start again, but that's how I'm, in my early 20s. So I began to look around the corners and outside of the mainstream, think about what would give me more of a sense of purpose and meaning, to be honest. And I found a publication the Arts Council published called Very Spaghetti. It was published in 1992, and it looked at an exciting new advent of digital media. It was called interactive media then, wasn't it? Interactive media, multimedia and music for interpreting. It really caught my eye, the thought that you could bring together multiple channels of those. And I got together with a group of friends who actually, and also the highly influential British software and Jones Morris, and we set up a digital media company for clients across the board. It was an active commercial company. Things that we really felt was quite to I forgot to go onto that slide. That was Sensation, and that was some really interesting media art. Paul Sermon, Telematic Vision, and in the early 1990s, artists beginning to think about where we locate ourselves and how sort of changing our sense of place in the world. And back to Studio Fish, we didn't write Pong, but we did decide that what we needed to do was to all learn C++ and learn to code. And it was very apparent very quickly, because none of my balls ever came back, that I was the star student. Absolutely. Computers on our lives. And of course, this is 1993, a long time before everyone was carrying a supercomputer in the back of their pockets. And it felt like something pretty big. And I definitely wanted to continue to somehow bring media art ideas to a broader audience. I wrote the term media art ideas because I've already alluded to the discomfort I share with that term. But I think what I mean by that is really the idea of a commitment to acknowledging technology and industry creating spaces in order to avoid those spaces becoming entirely corporate or government-led. It's really essential that art and artists and ordinary citizens populate and shape those spaces as well. And that's how I felt in the early 1990s, looking at the advent of what we called multimedia. But I also feel that very much here, coming into the open data, essentially is looking at underlying structures that are changing the form of the web as we know it today, and moving it into a really exciting new phase. More likely that anyone can be an artist. Universally accessible tool, the common pencil, is the most accessible thing out there, and anyone can draw, and I do believe anyone can draw. But I also democratization and high and low cultures that have been brought about by the ability for each one of us to publish and broadcast what we like, which has been brought about by digital technologies and networks, has been a really, really important development and influence for an idea. And maybe we might come back to that in the discussion after I finish 25 minutes. But I'm just going to walk you through some of the projects I've done with artists, particularly during my time at the Science Museum, and then what we're doing here in Data as Culture. So this is a piece by David Rokeby, who's a Canadian artist who writes all his own software. And it's called Watched and Measured. And it was in the Welcome Wing, the early Digitopolis Welcome Wing. And the purpose of Digitopolis was to explain digital through a permanent museum gallery, which I think we can all slightly laugh at now and say, yes, it's quite a flawed concept. Because, of course, within a couple of years of that gallery, the parameters of the ways in which people experience digital technology were completely different from the descriptions of digital technology that it described. But the kind of common themes that the gallery was split up to, I think, still stand up today. And that was computer vision, networks, futures, and privacy and surveillance. The museum brought me in at the time as a curator to show digital of outstanding application to David Rokeby and several others. And this piece of art, BAFTA, to create issues of privacy and surveillance. Artists who were developing software and writing all their own software from scratch were really working with software engines that had taken years and years of research. So very commonly those artists were making multiple works from one particular engine. It had a piece called Watch, where he would camera on a street scene, and the camera would capture. There'd be several different algorithms that it would flick between, and some would be moving objects and some would be completely still objects. And it took on a very, very political role in the street, because of course homeless people who were sitting and begging would be completely absent from the moving scenes and would be the only thing present in the still scenes, for example, and there were many other examples. And we, of course, were bringing this into a museum environment, structured. The structure that it's on is a sort of big glass and metal structure that was already a fixed structure design. So we've got one screen of images of people moving through the museum, and every now and then he wrote a digital zoom that zoomed in on them and their faces, as you can see. Actually, nearly every face in that shot, I think, is David when he was testing it. And he also applied a word, and it might say anxious, happy, excited, relevant. And when you think about how long ago this is, 15 years ago, David really wanted to provoke thoughts about the subjectivity of network systems. And this was at a time when there was a lot of conversation about the validity of the photographic and the CCTV image in law. So really prescient, really interesting project. 15 years ago. By the way, the Science Museum team in their research for this gallery hadn't seen any other example that was as good at a digital it had written himself, which again was a big shout for artists and artist-led research. So Jonathan Jones Morrison made a piece called Machination, which is a development of an existing work as well. And what happened is a neural network compared visitors that it captured at site and mapped a database of household objects that the artist created, patterns of visitors' faces, and resubmitted you what it thought you most resembled. I was most often a Scotty dog, which was quite upsetting, kind of ceramic object. It really raised a lot of questions about how machines see things differently than we do, and asked questions about whether they think differently, of course, as well. It reinforced the fact that representation is a matter of opinion, and that humans and machines represent things differently. Jumping into 2000, in 2004, I was the senior curator for a gallery, Fueling the Future, which is a hands-on interactive gallery for children aged 7 to 14 with their families and teachers, and it looks at the future of how energy might power our lives and what the challenges are. So it's a formal learning environment. But it was really important within that formal learning environment to bring art into the mix, to allow people to sort of see things from many different perspectives. That was quite a defining feature of museum environments in the sort of last 15 years of bringing together lots of disparate elements. And what we wanted, given that we decided to make it a hands-on gallery, we did want to see if the art could bring a sense of physicality. So I approached the artist Christian Muller, who's a German media artist, and said, can you think of a physical encounter with energy? And of course he took me at his word, came up with Do Not Touch, which is a floor-to-ceiling capacitive pole that if you touch it gives you an electric shock. Now you don't necessarily have to do that. When you enter that zone, which is part of the art, you get a very strong warning sound. But if you do touch it, you will get an electric shock. So there's a big question there of whether the shock is punishment or reward. And he's really, playing subversively with museum instructional language to provoke apparent misbehaviour. Very complex, a fail-safe way of making that safe in a museum environment, but it was, and visitors love it. So the last work I'll talk about from the Science Museum is quite a nice segue between there and here. It's Listening Post by Mark Hansen and Ben Rubin. Mark Hansen is a and Ben Rubin is a sound artist. And they met towards the end of the 1990s at a Bell Labs, and the idea of the workshops was to just see what happened together. And they were interested in the text when suddenly masses and masses and masses of people were taking advantage of the ability to enter into communication with one another over the network. And they started to analyse the data. And what they came up with was noticing the patterns of the way humans communicate online. So some of the first tasks they set themselves was, the first question they asked themselves is, what would the sound of the internet be like? And I think they had some thoughts about whether they were going to sonify the internet. And they decided they didn't want to sort of make it that simple or that straightforward. They wanted to sort of see what was being said. And when they analysed the patterns of how people talk to each other, the most common starter of every single, they looked at an internet relay, chat rooms and all sorts of different was I am. So they began to capture fragments of I am sequences, and they built this structure that's 251 vacuum fluorescent screens, sort of theatrical curtain sort of installation. It's floor to ceiling. And they play out different movements that are created, statistical sort of analyses of least used words, most used words, I am, things that start with I love. And every time I'm sorry I haven't got a movie of it, but you can find that on the internet. Every time it sort of enters a new movement, the size of the words changes, the motion of the words changes, and while the words are being played on the screen, sometimes one word across, sometimes 10 words in each screen out, accompanied by a lovely soundtrack, the footsteps, and it's very, very powerful. And what it is recognised as being is an outstanding engineering achievement of real-time data visualization and data mining technology. It's really, you know, their exploration of how the content and magnitude of the internet is kind of really, you know, potentially dying. There are huge questions that this work raises. It becomes a very, very important point in history. And nor are the artists unaware of the political ramifications. One of the things Mark said is the advent of these repositories of digital information presents us with an interesting challenge. How can we represent and interpret such complex, abstract and socially important data? And both he and Ben really recognise that now the simple act of collecting data has serious implications that were alluded to in this work. Opportunity of having that work at the Science Museum, which was on display for about 7 years, and it's not at the moment, but back. A group of young people to work with us to create their own. And so I had, I think it was about 15 young Muslim British women between the ages of 13 and 19 came and had spent a day each with different media artists, and they worked with artists who are photographers, robots with Jonah Brooker-Cohen, they did video sniffing, and they did a whole series of things that explored the impact of technology on their lives, and they had an exhibition alongside Listening Post, which was, again, a really important thing, is that members of a community who might feel disengaged from technology or from art get to make and do stuff and get involved, and I think that's something that is getting people to have that kind of interest. So I've touched on actually some of the issues the Data as Culture programme, ethics and politics of data and cultures of sharing, exchange, collaboration. And one of the things that we always like to tell, because it is such an extraordinary story, is that Data as Culture was initiated by Gavin and Julie within days of the ODI actually being operational. And people here are very clear that although this is a technology company, it's very much about behaviour change as much as it is about any technologies which might be affecting that change. I think that everyone working here at the ODI recognises a big challenge and shared language actually about what we're doing, and I think we all recognise that art can provide numerous and exciting ways of engaging with that and critically responding to that. So I don't think anybody here and I certainly wouldn't want to work if they did, thinks that art illustrates sort of is a marketing tool. It is something that is a fundamental tool that's all about supporting the ambitions of the Open Data Institute from a cultural perspective. It's been going for 3 years, as I mentioned. In the first 2 years, it showed works that kind of reflected different data sources that might challenge understanding of what data and how it might affect and reflect our lives. And last year, the programme looked at questions of ownership and authority over personal and public data. The third season, we're doing a couple of different things. We're developing a series of projects under the umbrella theme Data Anthropologies, where we're looking at the human at the centre of all of the data, and that's going to include talks, performances, partnerships, and exhibitions. There's an exhibition here at the moment, there's a piece of work over there, and if you wander around afterwards, you can look at Thompson and Craighead's work here. And we're also developing a major show for 2017. But a big thing we're doing immediately now is focusing on practice. So we've opened the Open Data up itself to a couple of artists in residence. And I'll tell you about their projects in a second. But I, at the same time, want to tell you about one of the first projects I worked on here, which is Julie Freeman's We Need Us. It's weneedus.org. It is a web-based artwork that we co-commissioned with the space. And it's a piece that draws live animated artwork powered by people using the web, and it is actually an open data artwork. Hello. There are some seats if you want to come and sit down, give me a tea break. So this piece draws on metadata by capturing, collecting and exposing real-time activities of the Citizen Science Project Zooniverse users as they click and swipe around the globe. It's a thought experiment, actually, which is one of the things I really love about it, where Julie's really exploring what the living qualities of data and might be, the fundamental qualities of data. I think we look to data to provide us with information, but I think Julie's argument when we discussed it was very much there's other things happening here that aren't so obvious and aren't so apparent, and we really should be exploring those as well, and I find that a really intriguing and exciting thought. And I kind of feel like this piece asks, if data had lives of their own, what would they be? And we don't know that they don't, but we also don't know what they would be. Search-led, we don't know whether Julie's process is going to result in a definitive answer, and I don't think that matters a jot. I think it's asking the questions that makes it so exciting. And it explores data in terms of what is unpredictable and what's unknowable. And these are qualities in life that I think are really important, that artists are very often concerned with, that corporates are very often not concerned with. It's really important. And a title was something that very deliberately reminds us of the humanity in technology, that we need us as much as we need it. And that's that. And Julie's here if anyone wants to talk about that in a few moments. So this is Thompson and Craighead, and they are the current artists in residence, and their work is on all around the ODI office at the moment, some of their existing work. And this particular piece is called Decorative News Feeds, and I'll tell you a bit about them before I explain this. What we like about their work is that they really question what it means to aggregate and interconnect large bodies of information, and they very often draw on the huge databases and repositories of human broadcast on the internet, such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the like, Google. And they invite reflection on how mechanisms like the World Wide Web alter, extend, and distort our understanding of the world around us. News feeds, news headlines from around the world, and transforms them into algorithmically drawn animated lines that create sort of beautiful across the screen. When you go out, you'll see it. It's just behind the reception desk. And as different headlines travel around the world, their original meanings and implications are sort of transformed as they cross over each other, and you start to draw unusual links. But it raises questions, about the mutability of data and information, and how the way we experience it informs its meaning as much as the actual content. And I always enjoy seeing that here, then walking into our kitchen where we've got the news on, the BBC News, and you've got the same information. And it's such a reminder that, a lot of journalism is such a construct as well. That we're constantly constructing our reality, and this really reminds us of that. John and Ali are really keen observers of the ways in which people interact with these new spaces. As I've said, they draw on YouTube footage, search terms, and all sorts of different extracted text from individuals and corporates around online media. And we were really interested in what people like John and Ali, who've been working together for over 20 years, since before the first and observing how we've all behaved online up until now, even though they're not open data artists specifically, and none of their existing work is specifically open data, although a lot of it is shared data, we're really keen to see what such critical minds will come up with in creating a new commission during their residency with us. So that will be quite exciting. In July, we'll have another artist in residence called Natasha Caruana. She's an award-winning up-and-coming photographic artist. She uses quite sort of bold and inventive performative strategies often in her work, and she's got great interpersonal skills. These aren't all her, by the way. And she also is very interested in scientific processes and forms of data capture, which she started speaking with us. She didn't call that data capture, but then she realised that she was working with data already, and she was really intrigued at the prospect of coming to work with us. Nearly all of her work is concerned with narratives of love, betrayal and fantasy, but she nearly always draws from online archives and the internet and personal narratives, which questions, the way that technology impacts today's relationships. And these images are from a series called Fairy Tale for Sale, where she became intrigued. These are all authentic, and there are lots of them, and she realised that people selling on their wedding gowns themselves, actually, and so that's become a project, and that sort of gives you an idea of her sort of serious fun that she applies. And what she said in relation to her residency here is, my art practice to date has always dabbled with data, looking at statistics of love and infidelity. Working at the ODI will push my pseudo-analysis head first into the world of data, to see what appears from playing with enormous possibilities of everyday statistics. So again, we don't know exactly what Natasha's going to create or exactly what Thompson and Craighead are going to create, but it's really exciting. to be part of that process. And again, those works will underlie our 2017 major exhibition. We'll also, don't want to go there yet, which will also involve a lot of participation. And again, I think all of us are quite interested in bringing projects with communities into the work we do. So I guess I'll conclude a bit by sharing what got me really excited about being able to work on this programme, which is the position I think ODI holds in relation to the fundamental shifts in what we might call last century thinking. I have to admit I've stolen that term from the artist Stephen Willett, who uses it frequently in his frustration with people's inability to look forward, particularly in relation to technologies and systems. And I think that's happening a lot to do with the developments in the network. And I just want to show you this slide that I found on a non-data artist website. I take the theft of my original work very seriously and would draw to your attention it's protected under UK copyright law. Please note, I will always sue for compensation if any part of my website, designs, sculptures, photos, or SEO, whether text or images, are found being used without prior authorization in writing. This includes derivative works. The law is quite making of what is called derivative work. That means work based or derived from another copyrighted work is the exclusive province of the owner of the original work. Now clearly this person's had some bad experience. And I don't want to denigrate this person, and I think that artists have absolutely the moral right to be the authors of their work and to earn a living from that and to be, and to take ownership of that. But I couldn't help thinking this came across quite heavy-handed, particularly as it happens, this is, let's admit, matter. Really. A bit. Third, shared. Boxes like science, art, technology. Let's think about systems and things that are holistic and things that cross different boundaries and pick up different influences as they go along. Broadcast, obviously, people in charge telling people what to think and do. No, let's all transmit and we're all saying what we think and it's all coming out. And so obviously the one-to-many moves to the many-to-many, the elite moves to the democratic, and the defined to the hybrid. That's what I'd like anyway. Thank you.
That was great. What we'll do now is take some questions for Hannah or for Julie as well, if you have any for both of them. Just a reminder, I'm going to throw around the catch box, which catches all the audio. If you could also just introduce yourself when you're asking the question, that would be great. So does anyone have any burning questions for Hannah? Any? No? Well, just a reminder, have a look around afterwards. All of the artworks that Hannah was mentioning, or sorry, some of the artworks that Hannah mentioned in her presentation are dotted around the office. There's one here on this wall, and there's a few others dotted around at reception and around the office. So feel free to have a browse afterwards.
We've got some leaflets as well, haven't we?
We do, yeah.
I haven't got them in here. Maybe we can go and get them, and people could have a look at the art of Thompson and Craig, because it's well worth a look, and it's a treat to be able to live with it here in the office. See?
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Excellent. Can I throw the catch box at you?
That's off-putting. We're going to have a big green cube.
Yeah, I know. Or maybe actually, if I, yeah.
I know. How is this recording me? I'm weird. Hi Hannah, thanks. I'm actually from the space that commissioned helped commission the We Need Us piece. I've heard a few people working in data art kind of talk about a kind of the data as a kind of medium. Do you think that's a kind of useful metaphor for it, like oil or clay or paint? Or
I actually think it is. because I think that it's acknowledging that this is something that is in our that wasn't. And I think it's useful in that respect, but I think it will become less and less useful as that becomes a given. I don't think that it's particularly surprising, but I think that it's interesting to acknowledge data as stuff that is all around us, because otherwise it's this sort of invisible. It's that thing about where's the real world? Is the real world on screen, or is it just the physical world? Most of us live our lives in the screen, and that's real, you know. Don't know if Julie would like to add to that.
Yeah, I think I like to this secretly. I like the idea of data as a material, to view it as an art material, and then because by framing it in that way, you treat it in a different way. I mean, data can be used to convey information in a very straightforward kind of a data viz or an infographic, or through traditional statistical methods. But if you want to in different ways, you know, conceptually, thinking of it as a material allows you to bend it and stretch it and be a bit freer with it, like unrelease it from its contextual shackles and do something else with it.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
idea of mutability.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just as a reminder, there's also going to be some events going on around the third Data as Culture programme. You're welcome to stay and have a look at the artworks, as I mentioned, but we'll also have the artists Thompson and Craighead giving an open house where anyone can come along on the 20th of May, and they'll be giving some background and context and sort of like a guided tour, I guess, of some of the artworks that are around the office. And Hannah. Sorry, that's all right. I thought it might be nice to show.
Maybe. Oh no, I want it on as well. Sorry? No. And so this sort of, Julie's followed some of, I don't know if you want to say, but you've followed the projects of Zooniverse and created different. Oh, what have I done? Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. And so each of these formulations represents a different series of activities. So this is users now interacting with Zooniverse, but it's not metadata that's collectible. It's not metadata that we're going to use and sell to a corporate. It's simply shaping these handcrafted algorithms that Julie's written and giving you a different way of seeing them. Sometimes when I'm looking at this and then I turn on to something else, I forget it's on my headset. And then I put my headset back on because I use voice recognition software. And I go, whoa, this sort of sounds. And actually, I love it when that happens, because we had a really big discussion, Julie and I, about whether this work should be shown in a gallery or live online. And Julie felt really strongly that you should encounter public art online in the same way that you encounter public art in the physical public realm. And so when I forget that I've got it there and then I sort of stumble on it, it's always that really exciting moment. But we are going to plan a series of performances for it, because the sound is really powerful, and obviously we can do much more exciting things with sound and vision if we do sort of performances at different galleries and events. I don't know if you want to add anything, Julie. Ooh, there we go. I'll let everyone go now. I just wanted to do that. Oh, question.
I've got one quick question. Chris Gibbon from SQW. I was just going to ask, you're talking about data all the time. Do you think open data itself has any kind of possibilities in itself, as it were, that don't apply to data more generally? Is there possibilities of collaboration or whatever with open data specifically rather than, as I say, more general data?
Understanding me, and I'm quite new here and I'm not an open data specialist, but I think the idea that, apropos the thing I showed you from an article, actually saying don't use my stuff, never reference me, that means that certain conversations are closed down. But if you're using open data that's available for reuse, you're applying thousands of different minds to the same information that can come up with different things. And I mean, it's clear what the open data opportunities are in industry, and in commercial applications, and for the public good in terms of the health service and travel and all sorts of other things. In terms of the art world, it's going to require different ways of thinking, but I think it really does challenge the notion of the single genius, which when you look into it is quite rare, actually. Most really incredible art is made by quite big teams of people in one way or another, again, without detracting from the skill of individual artists and the respect that I share for them. Do you see what I mean? I think there are huge opportunities, and I think we don't know what they are because we have to try. We have to have a go.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Thank you. Oh, and just to let everyone know, we'll be taking a break next week. We won't have a lecture next Friday, but back again the week after. Thanks, everyone.